Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being on the call. Thank you for taking time in this evening to be listening to us talk about what our vision and our plans are for Tanjong Pagar GRC. So good evening. My name is Harish Pillay, and I've been a new member of the PSP, as Michael has explained. I joined earlier this year because I feel that there is a lot of things that I could possibly contribute to making Singapore a better place. So it is with a lot of humility that I stand before you as a candidate from the Progressive Singapore Party running in the Tanjong Pagar GRC. I decided to step forward to serve my country because it was becoming clear to me that over the last decade or so, we have been led down a path that is not sustainable for our children, for our grandchildren, and for Singapore. Now, what do I mean by that? Let me tell you a simple story from a viewpoint of my niece. I have a 2-year-old niece, and I am sure many of you have young children like her in your family as well. My niece would live to see the next century, but what kind of Singapore would she be living in? I would like to do my part to ensure that she, her children, and her grandchildren will be able to live well and thrive in Singapore as our parents and us have been able to do so. The things I believe we need to change are, first, change to a sustainable economy that does not mortgage the future of Singapore to economic growth and the effects of global climate change, which risks Singapore becoming an unlivable place. Second, focus on improving the lives of the population that is living in Singapore and not just on growing the population. Third, measure the prosperity of our nation not just by the things or infrastructure we have built, but by the ability of our citizens to live happy lives. I grew up, like most of you, reciting the pledge every day in school. I will recite it now. We, the citizens of Singapore, pledge ourselves as one united people, regardless of race, language, or religion, to build a democratic society based on justice and equality, so as to achieve happiness, prosperity, and progress for our nation. These words have been repeatedly said every morning by every single Singaporean when they were in school, and we are reminded of it on an annual basis. It is actually a very meaningful phrase. The pledge captures both our shared ideals of the Republic of Singapore to help our citizens, like you and me and my niece, to achieve happiness, prosperity, and progress. She would, my niece, over the next 15 to 20 years, go to school and I hope become a happy young lady living in Singapore. By the time it's probably 2040, what would Singapore look like in 2040? Would the changes in the climate be so bad that she will be faced with an unlivable place? Would Singapore be so crowded with a population in excess of 7 million people? Would we have taken away all the remaining forests that we have in Singapore to house the additional people that are going to come in? Is that the world she has to grow up into? Or should she have a better, brighter, and more compassionate future? I'm standing for election and asking for your vote because I want to be able to be the one that can help pass on to her a Singapore that she can raise a family and live a happy, prosperous, and fulfilling life. I want to be able to tell her that I did all that I could to tackle the threats, the existential threats facing our country. That I made sure that I helped to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and accelerate Singapore into a 100% renewables-based economy. We can do it. We are small enough to be able to do that. And that is what I want, because if we can do that in the right possible way, by incentivizing our people, our engineers, our dreamers, our artists, our scientists, our planners, to create technology and designs that made us and help us transition to a sustainable energy future. You cannot have a sustainable energy future and expect to have a smart nation. If these two have to go together, the smart nation is necessarily riding on a sustainable energy future. This transformation is the reason why she will be able to live in a country that is exporting renewable energy, maintaining the same amount of population of approximately 2025, with a society that is looking after well the ones who are challenged and disadvantaged. I want to leave not only for her, but for all of our nephews and nieces and sons and daughters, families and friends, a legacy that Singapore, through the leadership of the PSP, steered the country from going down a path of ever increasing dependence on fossil fuel and technologies that are not sustainable, so that we can then create a compassionate and a happy country. Let me ask you a question. Do you expect your children to have an easier or a harder life than the one you had? We all want our children and our grandchildren to grow up in a world where they have the similar and growing opportunities for them to be able to live happy lives. In many areas of Singapore, we have been presented with false choices. For example, pursuing growth in financial services at the expense of technology, at the expense of arts. That is really unconscionable from my perspective, because a person is not just defined, a country is not just defined, a people is not just defined by the amount of money or whatever in that sense that is made. It is the rest of life. Life is a cacophony of all kinds of activities, the arts and culture. These are fundamental to everything that we do. Just as pursuing economic growth doesn't require reducing freedom of expression, we need to ask very simple questions. Has your life become easier or harder? The last few words in the pledge that I recited earlier, so as to achieve happiness, prosperity, and progress for our nation. There are very important three key ideals that we need to keep remembering and recounting and checking against. And the most important of the three, I feel, is happiness. Because if that is not realized, I'm not sure exactly what are we trying to achieve. We want to be happy in doing whatever that we are trying to do. It cannot be just measured in terms of how much infrastructure or roads and highways and train lines and airports and skyscrapers. That doesn't bring happiness. It is the life you live with your family and your friends, and when you enjoy the rest of Singapore and nature and every other thing and arts and culture. That's what brings life happiness. That's what brings us a meaningful life to live. We are seriously, unfortunately, missing a lot of this right now. I would also want to be able to, for all of us to be able to address the very important issue of our financial situation. For example, the issue of withdrawal of CPF contributions. This has changed so much so that we are right now constrained in serious ways, that we are tying our CPF to our housing, which is then tied to land costs, and a whole series of different initiatives by the current ruling party over the last 10 to 15 years that has essentially mortgaged the rest of all of our savings into purely for housing requirements. How are we even going to be able to use any of those for our retirement and for all of us who are aging to be able to retire and find a meaningful life post in a retirement life. These are very important things that needs to be asked, questioned, challenged in Parliament, because that's the place where these decisions will be made. I really get very sad and upset when I see people in hawker centers selling tissue paper, selling small trinkets, because they are not able to live a life that they can actually be happy in. That aches my heart. I've seen it so many times, it's frustrating. I've had friends from other countries visit Singapore, and when we went out for lunch together, they were asking me, Harish, why is it that there are older people in Singapore, in the hawker centers, cleaning tables and doing that kind of stuff? Why are they not happy at home and doing, being happy with their grandchildren and all that? I really didn't have a good answer to give. If we are truly a first world nation, we do not have a situation where our people can live first world lives. We are definitely not. So with that, I would love to hear from you later on during the Q&A. I would also love to have engagements with you as we have been as we go walk around in the walkabouts, to ask questions of us as what is it that we can bring to the table. With that, I thank you very much for listening, and I hand it over to Craig. Thank you, Craig.